So, welcome everyone, take two. My name is Nika Logan. I'm Associate Professor of Public Relations at Virginia Tech and the Diversity Chair of PRSA's Educators Academy. I'm excited to welcome you all to Race in the PR Classroom, presented by the Institute for Public Relations, PRSA Educators Academy, and the University of Texas at Austin Moody College of Communication. We are so grateful you all are here with us today. And joining me from the Institute for Public Relations is Anitra Henry, Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for IPR. Wave, Anitra. All right, so today we are discussing Black history and its importance in PR's past, present, and future. We are excited to share these leaders' perspectives and insights with you and look forward to the impactful takeaways from today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping rules. First, this is a Q&A type forum. To ask a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your virtual hand. Once you're called on, please remember to state your name and organization. If you'd like to ask a question anonymously, please type the message to the hosts in the chat and we will read your question aloud. Only moderators are able to see your question, so you will remain anonymous. Today's session will be recorded and will be available for playback later on today. Lastly, please remain respectful to our hosts and others on the call by keeping yourself muted at all times, unless you intend to share a comment or ask a question. Now, I'd like to welcome our panelists. Welcome, Dr. Eric Kwame Ade, PhD, APR. Dr. Ade is an assistant professor of public relations at Drake University School of Journalism and Mass Communication. He earned his doctorate degree in media and communication from the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication. Dr. Ade is from Ghana in West Africa, where he earned undergraduate and master's degrees from the University of Ghana. He is an accredited public relations practitioner and was a communications consultant for over 15 years in Ghana. Welcome to Dr. Lashonda Eady, PhD, APR. Dr. Eady is Assistant Professor of Public Relations at Penn State University. Dr. Eady is a crisis expert and investigates ways that crisis history can inform crisis communication scholarship and strategy. Dr. Eady also conducts historical research to explore parallels between historical crises and contemporary crises. The self-proclaimed practitioner scholar is passionate about public relations research as well as practice. She is accredited in public relations with her APR and has spent time primarily in the healthcare industry and has been recognized as a Dallas PRSA 40 under 40 2021 honoree. And finally, welcome to Craig Muckle, who is an award-winning and career PR communications professional, currently serving as the Director of Communication for the Council for Responsible Nutrition, a leading trade association for the dietary supplement and functional food industry. He began his career in 1981 at ESPN before moving to BET in 1990, Rite Aid in 1995, Safeway in 1997, and the Archdiocese of Washington in 2017. His work has included public relations, communications, and government relations, as well as public policy. In addition to his professional experiences, Muckle spent 2.5 years as an adjunct professor at Howard University's School of Communication, where he taught several undergraduate courses focusing on public relations writing, campaign planning, and execution. He was awarded the Washington Business Journal Minority Leader in Business Award in 2015, and also earned a Community Hero Award from Safeway. Thank you all so much for being with us today, and we look forward to hearing all of the perspectives you have to share. And now I'd like to turn it over to Anitra.
Yes, welcome our panelists. Thank you for a wonderful introduction, Nika. As always, it's such a pleasure to share the virtual stage with you. So we're gonna get started. So the first question we want to ask is for you, Eric. Why is Black or human history important in general? and 4, specifically public relations.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I think we are at a very pivotal moment in human history. When you look around, you realize that whatever the field of discipline you look at, be it philosophy, be it history, be it literature, public relations, it seems that we have tended to shoot ourselves in the foot. The point of entry for most disciplines, practically every discipline you can think of, starts from the Greek and the Roman era, right? Where drama and theater studies, we talk about Sophocles, Euripides, we talk about history, talk about medicine. It's all about the Greeks and the Romans. But we all know right now that, human history starts from Africa. Africa is the cradle of humanity, and that human civilization started way back, more than 3,000 years ago. In fact, we've found evidence that humanity, the bones of our ancestors, more than 300,000 years ago can be found in the Nile Valley, East Africa, Southern Africa, all over Africa. Yet, when we look around, we realize that not much credit has been given to all these ancient civilizations, human history, our common shared humanity. Go to the Nile Valley, the pyramids, and many other human civilization pieces, evidence still there for all of us to see, and yet we don't talk about it. What we have found is that, the academy has been colonized by Eurocentric ideas, which have tended to, shortchange all of us. What that has done so far is that we have lost so many perspectives. The various ancient wisdom that we can glean from our shared ancestry, from the Nile Valley, from Africa, from Black history, our common human history is all lost on all of us. What I've found is that even from where I come from, Ghana, we can see public relations predating, African notions of public relations predating what we read about public relations, for example, in the books. We've seen from our traditional courts, the role of the linguist, for example, as a spokesperson. We can see also back in ancient history that we have the likes of Sundiata and his human-centered human relations principles that we can glean from. When we look back, way back in time, we can see also that there are some ancient wisdom principles of that we call Ma'at. The ancient principles or doctrine of Ma'at behoves on all of us to be great stewards of human relations, of the society, of the environment. What does this say? It reminds us, the principle of Ma'at, for example, reminds us that, wow, there will come a time when we'll have to enter the hall of judgment. There will be a day of reckoning for all of us. So even as we live in this earth realm, we should all try to be good PR practitioners. We must have great human relations by behaving according to truth, honesty, justice, order, harmony, reciprocity, all these age-old values that I think are the basis of modern day public relations. So those are some of the things that I think make it important for us to look at Black history and to consider the values that we can draw from there to help us understand who we are as human beings, and which can help us better understand the crossroads at which we stand right now, so that we can push ahead in a way that will help us rediscover our human history, our humanity, and our common humanity, and our purpose for going forward as a people. So I think these are some of the reasons why it's important for us to harken back to see what we can learn from Black history, the values that we can draw from there, the civilizations and the various pearls of wisdom that we can glean from the ancient past, African history, Black history, because it is our common humanity. More than about 70,000 years ago, everybody on earth lived in Africa. It was not until 70,000 years ago that we started migrating here all over the globe. And so whatever the color of your skin, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, you are an African. And we should go back to that common ancestry and see what our ancestors used to do, what they did, the principles that they lived by, that helped them to develop the civilizations that we now see, and to try and rediscover all those values and bring them up and push forward on those accounts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Our other panelists, is there anything that you want to add or to share about why you think Black history is important in general, or specifically for public relations? Craig or LaShonda, anything you want to add?
Well, thanks a lot, Anitra. So I think, Eric went through quite a bit there, but, I think at the end of the day, public relations is always going to be about awareness and generating some conversation around things people may or may not know about. And I think regardless of, how much information is out there, we're always going to find people who can always learn more about something. And there's still an opportunity for people in the private sector and the public sector to learn more about Black history. And, it should, we've all heard it, that it really should be more than just 28 days. We should be talking about it every day in some form or fashion. So I think that's where we in PR can help advance that conversation.
Awesome. Well, the next question that I want to ask LaShonda, I'm going to ask this question for you to start with. What are some ways that you integrate Black history into the teaching of PR courses? And are there any specific resources that you recommend?
Well, firstly, I must say that I think I probably think about history in general more than the average person, because my research is in crisis history. So I'm always looking for ways to intentionally show how parallels can be made from not only Black history, but our world's history to what is going on now and to more contemporary crises. And I think a lot of times we might think anecdotally about things that have happened before, but I really believe that our current climate really calls for us to be more intentional about it. And so specifically regarding Black history, I try to do the same thing with that as well and be intentional about my inclusion, especially working at PWIs, primarily white institutions. I think it's really important for us to intentionally infuse that as much as we can. And so whether it is in my communications research class, when we start to talk about ethics and communication research, and we discussed the Tuskegee Experiment, where a widely known effective treatment for syphilis was intentionally held, unbeknownst to many Black families, and that continued for decades, which I think that example is a bit more mainstream and well-known than some others. But we also talk about Henrietta Lacks and how her cancer cells were harvested without her permission. And then it became, I think, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical scientist, but that cell eventually became, I think, what is known as the first kind of forever living. I don't know the word that they use. It's an I word. I can't think of it right now. But a long-lasting cell that continues to be used today from her cancer cells back in the 1950s. And so to take that a step further, when we do have those conversations, I also talk about what that means for today. So, if you think about the early days of our pandemic and how there was this concern that the Black community was not heeding to risk messaging as much as perhaps health organizations and others had hoped, I think that it's really important for organizations and for us as individuals to really acknowledge that a lot of that reluctance and hesitancy is rooted in history. Immortalized, yes, thank you, Dr. No, I could not remember that word. The HeLa cell was immortalized. And so that basically means what immortal means, that cell can be continuously used basically forever. Thank you, Dr. No, who actually is a cancer researcher. But anyways, I really do think it's important for us to think about how those historical wrongdoings are still creating difficulty and are possibly a big part of Black communities and other marginalized communities' hesitancy to follow that, and how not only should we acknowledge it, but we really need to have conversations to find out what can be, what can be done to kind of mend the fence, if you will, but also to understand and for organizations to move beyond the whole like obligatory, yes, we support it, or yes, we know about it and we acknowledge it and we recognize it. I think it really has to go a step beyond that, considering what our current climate is. And so having conversations like that with our students is really important as well, because they might be students today, but they are our CCOs of tomorrow and, directors of tomorrow. And so really catching them right now at a time where hopefully they are more receptive to some of that type of information is vitally important. And so the same thing can be done like in my crisis management class, when we are talking about proactive crisis planning, I'm intentional about asking them, okay, so what has happened in history that might also, impact how various audiences and stakeholders are going to receive this information. And so that's also an opportunity to remind them of some of that history and what it means for us now. And then even looking at case studies, my campaigns class currently is studying case studies right now. Actually, we're going to have a Twitter chat when this is over. So if you're on Twitter, look for our hashtag. But when we talk about those campaigns, let's say the fashion industry and kind of some of the issues that it's had with like blackface or other imagery that is racist, having those difficult conversations with them, I think, especially in the classroom, is very important to at least bring it to their attention. And another example is like Aunt Jemima syrup, changing that iconic brand, making that change. I think it was maybe last year or the year before because of the racial undertones. And so looking at current events that are going on that are in mainstream, but then also showing how it's rooted in some not so great things that have happened in our past. And then lastly, I would just say, like I said, my campaigns class has been looking at case studies this week. And another example was Crayola's Colors of the World crayons. And so as we discussed that particular campaign, I hadn't even planned on really talking about my own experience and with the crayons, but I took advantage of that opportunity to tell my students about the first time that my daughters and I were in a store together and saw that box of crayons, and why that was such a significant thing, and how without actually knowing and understanding the experiences of Black people, you wouldn't even be able to do anything like that as an organization that's going to be that impactful, because they have different lived experiences. And so it ended up being a conversation also about colorism and how, unfortunately, that can be very divisive in our communities as well, and not just in Black communities, but I know in other cultures as well. And so really, I think we just have to intentionally look for opportunities where we can not only share that history, but also connect it to the present, especially for those who don't have that knowledge and who don't have similar lived experiences and resources. So the Museum of Public Relations has a lot of really great information on its website for Black public relations pioneers. IPR, who is co-host of this webinar today, has the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion group that does a lot of great work that I think can also inform, our perspectives and how we are looking at what's happening currently as well, which is important even when we're talking about history. And then there are a lot of scholars out there like Denise Hill and others who are doing work to uncover those stories that we might not know of from those who have been excluded from our current history. And so I think that in addition to that, every opportunity that we can get both Black people, because I'm sure we don't know all of the history either, and others as well, we should, if it's a documentary or if it's, a 20-minute YouTube video that can help us learn more about that, I think we should take that opportunity so that as we gather more information about it, we can incorporate it as we encounter opportunities to be able to do that in the classroom and outside of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Craig, my next question is for you. How do you incorporate Black history into PR practices as a practitioner and as a consultant?
Well, thanks a lot, Anitra, for the question. And here's what I would say, first of all. It's one thing to incorporate them into PR practices, but the real question should be, is the environment right for you to do that wherever you're working? And what do I mean by that? Well, as we started, we talked about everyone's biography, where they've been. Obviously, I spent my career in corporate America in some form or fashion. And so if there is not a culture in place to support the Black history, what we're talking about here, Black history, then it's really going to go nowhere, because at that point, it's just going through the motions and everyone's going to understand that the effort is not sincere. And a great example is when I worked at Safeway, and I spent 18 years of my career there, and another 9 at ESPN at the beginning of my career. Those are both organizations where, even though when I started ESPN, we were creating a culture there 2 years after it was formed, and at Safeway, we had a culture already established, but really in either of those circumstances, the culture was such that people of color, people who were different, were embraced. We had in-house affinity groups. We talked about partnerships with groups who we would support. For instance, we had over 10,000 of our employees at Safeway, and we had in our Eastern Division here in the Washington area, we had over 100,000 employees. So about 10% of our employee base were people who were challenged in some form or fashion. So we had partnerships with Special Olympics. We had partnerships with local ARC organizations who could help us find people who are looking for work to be employed and to really be part of the fabric of our culture, and to bring their unique talents into our environment. And that's where you really can incorporate, whether it's Black history or history about these other people who are different, into the organization. Because if it's simply about, hey, it's Black History Month and we're going to have a Black History Month factoid every day, and that's it, you have not accomplished anything. First of all, you're going to alienate those within the affinity group who you're discussing, because they know it's phony. Number two, the customers in that circumstance are going to know it's phony, and then they're going to decide, hey, if you're faking it like that, why should I shop with you? And so it really has to be a culture commitment from the top down. The organizational leader or leaders have to say, this is important, here's the reasons why, and it really should be mandated into everyone's performance review, so it's measurable and it's actionable. And without that, it doesn't matter how good a PR practitioner I or anyone else here is, without the culture being set for you, it's not going to work. And I would tell that whether, for my employer, where I'm currently at, I would say that to them. If I'm a consultant coming in and they say, we want to do this, before I can even do anything, are you committed to building a culture? And understand, if you're committed to building a culture, this is not going to be the kind of thing we're going to do in 30, 60, 90 days. It's going to take months, it's going to take years. So it's that level of commitment and dedication that's going to be required for you to see this effort take hold, and understand it's going to be essentially moving the Titanic.
Thank you so much, Craig. So true, so much that you unpacked there. Eric, I've got more questions for you. So you talked a lot in the beginning and just unpacked so much. And there's one thing that I want to make sure we unpack and touch on, and that is, what does it mean to take an Afrocentric perspective to PR? And how do you teach it? How do you practice it?
Wow, that's a big question. I hope we have enough time to talk about that. Well, when you look at any field, like I said before, it's like the voice of the Africans, of the Blacks. I mean, the voices have been muted. What is the role of Black public relations practitioners? What's the role of the Black man in any field of endeavor? I think the problem has to do with the illusion of the racial ladder, which extols ideas of white supremacy, and which is really at the root of many problems that we have about various axes of discrimination, be it based on sexuality, based on gender, based on so many other criteria. And I think the solution to that is visiting most of these issues based from an Afrocentric perspective. What do we mean by Afrocentrism or Afrocentricity, which the founder, Molefi, Kete, Asante, likes to call it? That's how he likes to refer to it, Afrocentricity. It's about recentering, placing the Black person at the center of the experiences of humanity. So when we attend to various social phenomena, we look at them based on the role of the Black person. What is the role of the Black person? What's the agency of the Black person in various phenomena? So it's a powerful theoretical paradigm for examining various historical contemporary issues, but from the perspective of the role of the Black person. And we think that public relations and practically every field stands to benefit from an Afrocentric perspective. One way in which we can benefit is the way in which the Afrocentric lens helps us to realize some of the African philosophies that so far have been missing from our current discussions, which I think holds the key to the solution of many of the issues that we talk about in diversity, equity, inclusivity, social justice matters. What are we talking about? When you look at the African landscape, it's full of so many philosophies, which so far we are not talking about. We can refer, for example, to the notion of caritas. The African people believe so much in the supernatural. We believe so much in the influence of God. The notion of caritas just means that, we have to be good stewards. We have to have good human relations because God or the divine expects us to be our brothers and our sisters' keeper. So that's the notion of caritas. We can also talk about the idea of Ubuntu. We can talk about Ujamaa. We can talk about Bilchensi, which one of my friends recently published on, that encourages all of us to be able to have good human relations because that is how we are expected to be. That is how human society is supposed to function. And you ask the question, how can we teach these ideas? It takes a very high level of radicalism because what we have now is systemic, routinization of discrimination and the recognition of differences. When you go back to the African traditional practices, yes, we knew that there are differences in humanity. There are people with different complexions. Some are males, some are females, and so on and so on. But we don't have a certain ordering, rank ordering of importance, which Eurocentrism promotes, right? And so to be able to deal with this, we have to go back to basics. And I was reading a number of scholars and what their thoughts are on how we can fix the system, right? For example, Dr. Joyce King, he talks about, she talks about so many ideas. She talks about militant education, which she distinguishes from the idea of social justice education. For example, she says that for us to fix this problem that we are facing and teach those African values, we must adopt, an approach that she calls militant education. And she said that is different from social justice education. She says that social justice education is just about focusing on democracy and promoting, the individual's freedom to exercise one's humanity. But the militant kind of education that she's talking about is rooted in African epistemology. That focuses on raising our collective consciousness, and then, highlighting the agency of everyone, the current, the future generations, so that we can support our common struggles to rediscover our humanity, because that is what it is all about, trying to help us to become more human, because we have lost that humaneness and that humanity that is in us. So For us to, in PR, we must commit to studies of race. We must highlight the roles that various people, all manner of people, not just a few people, all manner of people, people from Africa, Black people, the First Nations people, the Asians, everyone, because we all come to the table with something, we all have something to offer. We must correct the history. The history that we teach right now in public relations, in other fields, must be fixed. We must now give credit to all peoples, various people. What have we done? What have we contributed? That's why I like the Museum of Public Relations, what they are doing to highlight the roles, the critical roles played by not just white people, but Black practitioners, because we have done a lot, but which has not been captured so far in the textbooks and what we are teaching in the classrooms. How do we teach this African-centeredness? And Drake is on the path of righteousness in this regard. At Drake University, we're just going to start a program we call Drake Experience Ghana. We should do travel abroad programs, take people, try to raise the consciousness of our students by taking them to Africa, taking them to Black communities so they can learn, because the culture has been transmitted for so long where the students are lost. They don't just know, they behave the way they behave because they are ignorant. And to break that mischief of ignorance, we must take them to various, to others, take them to Africa, take them to Brazil, take them to Ecuador, take them to other societies. And at Drake, we are doing that. I know the University of Oregon has, for example, the Media in Ghana program. That takes students for almost 2 months to go and experience a different culture. And when they come back, you realize that they become so enlightened. And even they will start questioning themselves, the things that they read, the norms that they've taken for granted. Those are some of the ways. Also introducing other voices, Black scholars, other theories, theoretical perspectives in the things that we teach in the classroom. When we're talking about case studies, for example, let's dare to be different and introduce other cases from Africa, cases from the Middle East, cases from South America, cases from Asia in our discussions. I do that in my classes. And we need to highlight the roles of many other people, many other cultures, the PR elements, the PR principles, the best cases that we can find in traditional communities in Africa, the traditional communities in India, the traditional communities in Japan, and not just limit ourselves to Eurocentric ideas, what we've come to accept and what we've come to accept and not to question all the time. We should try and swim further afield and bring on board many other perspectives, international, global perspectives I'm talking about. I think that will help. We should look at campaigns when we are teaching our campaign classes. Let's try and bring and introduce campaigns that are happening, success stories, and even the failures from other cultures, so we can learn from that. That way, we can broaden the horizon of our students. Molefi, Kete, Asante, and Nadav, they have a very interesting book, which I'll recommend. It's titled Being Human Being. Being Human Being, a very fascinating book to read. I think I have one that I'll pull from my study right here. Where did I put it? Being Human Being is right here. Where do I have it? So many books here that I have there, right there. So this book titled Being Human Being is a 2021 book and is subtitled Transforming the Race Discourse. In the last chapter, they invoke the Ma'atic principles, because at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. Public relations of all the fields, because of its focus on multiple stakeholder perspectives and the creation and the maintenance of mutually beneficial understandings, relationships between organizations and their stakeholders, I think is uniquely placed to be a thought leader and drive change in promoting humanity, human values, the Ma'atic values that we talk about, values of truth, values of order, reciprocity, morality, harmony, human-centeredness. I think PR will do very well in incorporating all these ideas and try and get the other members, the other fields in the academy to also follow the lead of public relations. And we, those of us who are PR educators, we have a very critical role to play in learning. We must also go and learn some of these Afrocentric values because you cannot teach that which you don't know, right? So we have to go back and learn some of these things and try and bring them into the classroom, and even mount various training programs with practitioners in the field so that they can also design campaigns that better understand Black communities and other people, so that we can have more authentic, more effective campaigns going forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So this next question, I really want to ask of all of you, but LaShonda, I'm going to start with you since you're our resident crises expert. Can you talk about some PR crises of the past and their impact on racial groups today?
So I think that I probably mentioned a few of, at least one or two already. And I guess an argument could be made that they aren't necessarily crises, but definitely the things involving the medical industry and healthcare. And even like I mentioned, how that also has implications for the pandemic, which isn't necessarily the same thing, but also has been a difficulty for the medical industry as well. And I think in general, organizations fail to look back to see that some things from, let's say, the civil rights movement or other race-related issues or crises still, have, I don't want to say lingering, but enduring impacts on specific target audiences. And I think there are a lot of examples of companies. I think Craig was talking some about how the culture actually has to be one that is conducive for making that kind of change, especially for Black, especially regarding Black audiences, but also other historically marginalized audiences. And so I think there are a lot of examples from the industry of campaigns who were trying to kind of do this performative thing and have a campaign directed towards Blacks and others, but that really missed the mark because it lacked that authenticity and because it really was mostly performative rather than actually kind of get into the root of what the issues are. And so I think that like Starbucks Race Together might be an example of, how they had what they thought, I would imagine, they had what they thought was a really great idea to start this conversation and to create a space for people to talk about race, but didn't really think that, when somebody is going in for their first cup of coffee, that might not be the conversation that A, they want to have at all, whether they're, a minority or not, but also B, is that something that I really want to be prompted to talk about from my barista? Probably not. And so I think that a lot of campaigns like that have really lacked insight and foresight as well about, how it might sound good in conversation or in the conference room. It might actually look good on paper, but if the right voices aren't present in that planning stage before it's actually implemented, I think a lot of that kind of thing can happen. I think that organizations also have to be careful about appearing to kind of take advantage of and kind of join the bandwagon. Like I think Bath and Body Works was kind of under fire recently because they kind of slapped some new labeling on old products in recognition of Black History Month, which seems very superficial and self-serving without actually putting time and effort into really being committed to whatever they were trying to do to support, I guess, the cause of what they think is popular or necessary in today's climate. I think those are the only examples that I can think of right now, but I'm sure there are a lot of other ones.
Craig, I'm sure you have something to add here. in terms of crises from the past or even recent, let's call it recent past.
And, so, yeah, and I have a couple I'm going to focus on here. And I do appreciate, what LaShonda kind of teed up there a little bit. But the first thing I'll say is over the last couple of years, I think we've seen between George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, many other people be influenced negatively, killed by law enforcement. And I'm going to tell you right now, no one's really talking about it, but I think law enforcement has a significant public relations problem because we have seen through video that, Stevie Wonder could see with his own eyes that police are saying something completely different than the truth. And yet they're going to put out conversations, put out statements that say they didn't do this, they did that, when, it's right there for all of us to see. So I think, first of all, law enforcement has a crisis. Unfortunately, they don't realize it, and that's a huge problem. But let me say this as well. In terms of trying to bring attention to that crisis, I think people who started the term defund the police have done themselves an incredible disservice. And Anitra, I'm there with you because my wife and I did the same thing the moment that those three words were uttered, because my wife is a former marketer and advertising executive. And so it's all about word choice. Words matter. And I think all of us understand the premise of what was trying to be communicated. But when you come with defund the police, you're automatically creating a polarized situation, and your message is not going to be heard because the opposing voices are already going to tell you that you want to do this and we're going to oppose that. And we saw it throughout the course of months and a year, just where that went. And I think it's incredibly important for our activist community in particular that it's fine to come up with slogans, but I would encourage our activists, and I'm going to go so far to say it starts in academia. So for people like LaShonda and Eric, and hopefully you're already doing this, your institutions do it, as someone who spent 20 years of my career, not only doing media relations, but also doing government relations and public policy work. I mean, these are critical components. And if to be in public policy, to be in government relations or something like that, and not have a communications background, it's not going to work. Because if you can't communicate your message, your policy effectively, those people that are in opposition to you are going to have a field day. And I think we saw that manifest itself last year, and it kind of continues to do that now. And that's going to continue to be an uphill battle. I think ultimately, to reallocate funds from the police department to do other things is really what they were trying to say. But because they said defund the police, that immediately raised the shackles of the opposition. And ultimately, I think the message was completely lost, completely lost. The other thing I'll say, and we can talk about all of these all day long, and there's plenty of other ones as well, is the notion around this critical race theory. Now, this is not so much language, the premise is great. But again, when you don't have messaging that's really well-formed to go with it, you allow the opposition to take it to places and co-opt your message where you don't need it to go, where you don't want it to go. I was just reading the other day, and I called it up earlier today, that 85% of Americans, this is an opinion piece in the Washington Post from Tuesday, I think it was, basically most Americans are in favor of having things like education that puts people in uncomfortable places. They want to know more about history of marginalized persons and stuff like that. They want it in schools, they want it in their libraries, but we have allowed elected officials to take that conversation in places and made it a rallying cry for the opposition. And once again, I just don't think that the people in favor of critical race theory have done a good enough job to talk about, or certainly their voices are not heard as loudly. And I think our young people who are learning about PR, learning about communications, really need to understand, even those people going into activism, that want to have a career in activism. This is an incredibly important component of your success or failure. What words you choose, how you get your message out, who you use to assist you with your messaging. And these are all campaign matters that we all know about as practitioners or former practitioners wherever you are in your career. But the point is that words matter. And if you're not a communicator at heart, if you're not thinking about your word choice, your efforts are not going to succeed. Because I think ultimately, reasonable people will coalesce around reasonable thoughts, reasonable word choices. But when you do things like defund the police, you've made something with a reasonable premise appear to be unreasonable. And that's where you fall into a morass and you're not going to be successful.
Thank you for sharing, Craig. So with that, this again, my next question is for all of you. So whoever wants to jump in and answer this next question, feel free to do so. What role do you expect for movements like Black Lives Matter to play in teaching PR today and also practicing PR? And what role do you think it'll play in the future?
Well, kind of to piggyback off of what Craig said, which as I was preparing for today, I thought of something similar in that because our current culture is so politicized and polarized, I really think that in order for our message to get to those who still need it, and not just ours, but other organizations, we really have to be more strategic and I think thoughtful about the words that we use, as Craig so eloquently gave an example, a current example of. And so I think that we really have to think about those things more intentionally, whether that is, we are spearheading a new campaign or trying to start a new movement, or if we are talking about the classroom, when we know that we are sharing information that might be polarizing or might have that negative perception, whether or not, it's justified, we have to think of creative ways and strategic ways to get that information across and make sure that we aren't making our audiences or the people we hope that will get that information, that we aren't immediately making them bring walls up and be unresponsive or unreceptive to what we're sharing. So I think that especially today and moving forward, that has to be a really big component of our strategy.
Eric, do you have anything you want to share on that?
Well, I think LaShonda has made great points. And I think part of the plan to be purposeful, to be intentional, has to do with steeping all that that movement does in solid research. I think it's a noble effort that they are making, but some of their actions, some of the strategies, you can see there are quite a number of slip-ups, and it has tended to be polarizing. I know it is a very contentious issue, but part of the the disidentification, the disorientation, and the conflict that it is creating can be resolved if it steeped most of its actions in real, credible, longitudinal research that informs the campaigns and the tactics that they are adopting.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, unfortunately, my time at Howard ended before things started getting good from, shall I say, because I would have loved to have been in the classroom when, on some of the issues I just talked about, when law enforcement was going down the veritable, was just going down their path of destruction around, we're just not going to tell the truth. Because we're and they feel like the police always should get the benefit of the doubt, but again, with the video. So I always made it a point as walking in as an adjunct professor, I always feel I kind of was walking off the street, sharing my views as someone, as a, career practitioner. So I would typically do what happens in my job. I would have a game plan for my class, and if something would come up that's topical, I would veer off and say, let's talk about this today. Let's do something around this, because I think it's those discussions that are typically difficult to have, but you have got to give the students an opportunity to talk them through, share the ideas, because ultimately, if they're going in to go into corporate Americas, they have to have the strength and the confidence to say, wait a minute, this is a problem wherever the issue is going to be. And if they don't have that confidence, they don't have the strength, particularly when they're going into boardrooms that don't look anything like themselves. I have typically been one of the few people in the communications discipline, or frankly, in any discipline, to be in boardrooms. And so if you're not confident going in, people are going to know that immediately, and they're not really going to either hear completely what you have to say or respect everything you're going to say. So I always wanted my students to be in a position of having had an opportunity to kick around these ideas in the classroom, maybe do some lessons around them, whether it's writing, debate style pieces around an issue, and say, let's do this, because ultimately you may be the person that's going to have to write an op-ed for your organization, to ghostwrite something for your CEO around an issue that he or she has. And if you're not prepared to do that, if you haven't thought critically about that, then you're not going to prepare yourself. It's such a competitive landscape out there right now. Look, I spent 2 years recently unemployed, and with all my experience, so and as frustrating as that was, I was determined to not let that deter me, but also to continue to advance my skills to make sure that it wasn't any longer than it needed to be. And I have two of my colleagues were on the call, so I thank them for being here, taking time out of their busy schedule today. And my boss would be here, but he's going to get the tape, because it's been great to engage with fellow practitioners who have the same passion and energy around communications that I do. And ultimately, we just want to make our organizations better. And I'm just here to encourage everyone, have the passion around the work, don't be afraid, and hopefully build the right culture that our messages around these issues can be relevant. Because again, without the culture, there's going to be nothing to really sustain the public relations effort.
Thank you, thank you. So I have a question, and LaShonda, you and Craig have both brought up some great examples of both some organizations or some cases where people got it wrong. I want to hear from you all about cases where people got it right in conjunction to or in relation to Black history, addressing in a timely fashion some things that have happened maybe in the recent past. Which organizations are high on your list? What are you talking about? What are you seeing as professors and practitioners that you're like, hey, they got it right?
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and start. And look, I'm a sports fan. I'm not going to lie. And I'll tell you, aside from what I mentioned was wrong, the NFL is typically in the wrong category, although they try, and again, we'll put that aside because we know what their issues are. But conversely, they want to be the NBA. The NBA, I think, actually does have it largely correct. They have allowed, you can just tell it's a vast culture difference between the NFL and the NBA. And you can look at AllStar Weekend. You can just look at how the NBA, they have a slate of games. They sort of have owned, this Martin Luther King Day thing, where they do a game on the day of, but there's also some work in the community around it. They also allow their key players to actually be activists. LeBron James and other players have been activists around critical community issues, whereas the NFL have typically dissuaded their players, or certainly discouraged their players from doing that. Shall I just name Colin Kaepernick as a prime example? I mean, we don't really need to look any further than that. And so I think those are examples that are right in front of people, where two sports organizations have tried to do something around this. One has done it great. One is really doesn't have a clue.
Well, I think I would weigh in here, following from Craig's great points. I think one great example that we can see is Starbucks and their Race Together campaign that they did, right? And even their CEO, Howard Schultz, speaking up on race relations. I think that's a very laudable, great example that we see. But organizations must be careful when they want to speak out on some of these things. I believe that it's important for an organization, if you are to speak on race relations and such issues of social justice, for you to go back to your mission statement, your purpose, because there's a sense in which your actions may be deemed to be inauthentic. What have you been saying all along? What is the organization set up based on? What's at the very root, the foundation of the organization? What are the main missions, the values, or the purpose of the organization? I think the organization should start from there. So that way, whenever you come up speaking up on such great big issues, it will be seen as more in line with your original purpose. And then, so although I speak very highly of the Starbucks Race Together campaign, there are, in some minds, there's a sense in which some people think that what business has Starbucks got now weighing in on such an issue. So although it's good, it would be better. It would have been better if they had been saying things like that from the get-go, or even if they have founded their organizations like what Ben & Jerry's has been doing, where they say they stand for peace, love, but also for ice cream. So it's very important for the organization to go back and look at their purposes, their mission statements, their visions, and all that, and try and make sure that it's in line with their current positions on social justice issues. So good job, Starbucks, on that account, but there's more they could have done better, and they have to go back to basics and look at why they set up the organization.
LaShonda, you get the last word on this one. Which organizations?
Oh my gosh.
Top of mind for you that gets it right?
I think Craig gave two really great examples of right and wrong, because mostly I can just see those who need much improvement, who are not getting it right. And I think earlier in the conversation, when the discussion was surrounding culture and how that takes time, I am curious to see if a lot of the organizations who, back in 2020 committed to doing more for DEI, if in fact we will be able to see that was truly a commitment, both in their representation within the organizations, but also in the dollars that they're directing towards it and the meaningful change they're working towards. So I can't think of any that I think are doing it great, other than I would agree. I think the NBA is doing a great job, and Eric stole maybe one of mine too, because I was thinking in general, when we talk about social justice, that Ben & Jerry's has been doing that stuff before it was even popular, and continues to do that. And so I think they are probably a really great example of that. I think Target is probably on its way to being a good example of doing that, even though I question some of their judgment about things like the bathroom bill. But even if you look at them this month compared to maybe the Bath and Body Works example I gave, as far as campaigns related to Black history are concerned, I think that they at least are trying to show more intentionality in what they're doing to support Blacks and to uplift them. And so I think that is really probably the best example I can think of right now is Target.
Awesome. Well, panelists, thank you so much. All of you who have joined us today, we want to thank you for being here with us. As always, Nika, my great co-host, it's a pleasure to be here with you. We want to thank PRSA Educators Academy for their partnership, along with the University of Texas at Austin, Moody College of Communication. Without their support, we would not be able to offer our panelists a stipend for their time and for their education and experience to come on and share with us. So thank you all again for being here. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me directly. It's Anetra, A-N-E-T-R-A, at institute4pr.org. And we will see you all next month. The replay will be available on IPR's website in the next 24 hours. Have a great day, and thank you all, and happy Black History Month.